Alexander Tillage Galt was born in Chelsea, England, in the London area in 1807. His father was a Scottish poet, author, and journalist John Galt. On his mother's side, his grandfather was Alexander Tillich, hence the middle name of Tillich, or Tillage. He was an inventor, clergyman, author, and journalist. As for Alexander himself, he came to Canada in 1828 when his father had got into business in the 1820s. The family had decided to send him to Canada. After initially studying to be an Anglican priest, he abandoned this idea in 1830. Galt seems to have been just very indifferent to what kind of Protestant a person was, so long as they were a Protestant, and he gave money to different Protestant church groups throughout his life. When he married for the first time in 1843, Galt converted from Anglicanism to Methodism, but his wife was a lifelong Presbyterian. His son Elliot Galt later converted to Calvinism just before his death in the early 1890s. He then became a lawyer and eventually a judge in Lower Canada, although Alexander was never much into the practice of law. He then spent most of the 1830s going back and forth between Canada and England, and he also got into business with the Grand Trunk Railway and set about trying to connect the St. Lawrence River to the Great Lakes by rail. In 1847, he also founded the St. Lawrence Atlantic Railway Company that connected the Great Lakes to the St. Lawrence River as well. He also became a lifelong lover and supporter of railroads throughout his life, thanks to his first cousin, the president of the Canadian Pacific Railroad, Sir Hugh Allen. Galt was likely involved in some capacity at the Pacific scandal of 1873-74. He seems to have either covered his tracks very well or bailed out before it got out of hand. By the time the Pacific scandal had even started in 1873, Galt was a multi-billionaire despite being poor as a kid. In 1843, he permanently moved to Montreal, where he married a prominent local woman. They eventually had a son named Elliot, who was born in 1850. Alexander lost his wife due to complications from childbirth the day Elliot was born. In 1868, Alexander Galt married his sister-in-law, who already had 9 stepchildren from a previous marriage. They did have one child together, but that died in infancy. Obviously, having 9 stepkids would eventually cause problems down the road. When his biological son Elliot inherited his $1 million fortune after his death in 1893. His step-siblings had not given any of their stepfather's money, and only one of them outlived Elliot, who, by the way, had a terrible heart condition from birth. Elliot never married, and as a lifelong bachelor by the time of his death, he'd become one of Canada's richest men in 1928. However, after a 7-year legal battle, this last surviving stepchild of Alexander Tillage Galt finally got some of the remaining money from Elliot's estate, but the Great Depression had made the entire family fortune utterly worthless, so the stepchild died penniless. Alexander had left no instructions to pass any of his step-siblings from Elliot. Galt has no living descendants today. In terms of politics, Alexander Tillage Galt was elected to the Lower Canadian Legislature in 1849. It was here that he was passionate in the fight against slavery in the U.S. and became an ardent abolitionist. By this time, he also had business deals with some Southern American businessmen who were oftentimes slave owners. As a result of his contemporaries said that Galt was hypocritical. He also befriended both George Brown and Sir John A. Macdonald, who had a mutual loathing for each other and attacked each other using different newspapers. That remained neutral so that he could remain advantageous to both men in spite of being a journalist. He was also someone who was often referred to by a great many people as being a very stubborn idealist. He had a reputation for being stubborn to the point of stupidity over even the most trivial of topics. It was not until Confederation that Galt began to really make his mark in politics. It had begun in London, England, along with George Etienne-Paschal Tache in 1858, where he was formally presented to Queen Victoria personally. But other than that, neither he nor George Etienne-Paschal Tache achieved the desired aim of the visit to get the British government to force all the different colonies of British North America into one nation, which would take about a decade to achieve. Alexander Tillage Galt became Minister of Finance of Upper and Lower Canada from 1858 to 1867. He also introduced very high tariffs. Many people thought these were foolish, and some were even repealed by the British government after Confederation, and many more were reversed by the Canadian government internally. In terms of Confederation itself, Galt attended the Charlottetown, Quebec, and London conferences. He also helped to draft some of the 22 resolutions of the 50 resolutions that Sir John Macdonald didn't draft. He was also knighted by Queen Victoria at the London Conference for his work with Confederation. After Confederation, Galt was temporarily Minister of Finance in 1867, before that was given to Sir Samuel Tilley later that same year. He also increasingly supported immigration. Galt was also Minister of Indian Affairs from 1872 to 1880. His son, Elliot, succeeded his father as Minister of Indian Affairs, which he held from 1880 to 1889. Alexander Galt also set up schools on the Indian reserves in 1879. His son Elliot made education mandatory for all native children in 1883, but Elliot had resigned by the time the first residential schools were started in 1889. So Alexander Tillage Galt then got involved in business once again and started to do different things. Firstly, he was to promote free trade or economic reciprocity with the British Empire. This eventually got him a job on the joint British-Canadian Newfoundland and U.S. Fisheries Commission in Halifax, Nova Scotia in 1877. This eventually said the Americans had to pay the others $5.5 million in damages because of various things. Despite Galt's personal stubbornness, he succeeded only in alienating the Americans who refused to pay the money. They then went and negotiated the other three specific fishing treaties with their respective governments in 1888. In 1880, Galt became the first Canadian High Commissioner, or Ambassador, to Great Britain. This was as a result of a feud between him and John Macdonald, which was partly due to the latter becoming increasingly embittered alcoholic. Yet, unlike most of these feuds, it was probably partly because of Galt's severe stubbornness as well. He remained the High Commissioner to Great Britain until 1883. The second post-Confederation of Alexander Galt was also with his son Elliot Galt, was to help develop the Canadian West, including Manitoba and Northwest Territories. Alexander and Elliot took a trip out to what is now Lethbridge, Alberta, in 1882. They also helped to financially found many towns in Western Canada, including most famously the city of Lethbridge in Galt County, Alberta. When he retired from politics in 1883, he focused more on his business interests in the West. The elder Galt went on to found the Galt Coal Company near Lethbridge, Alberta, in 1883, which lasted until 1928, when his son Elliot passed away. He then spent increasing amount of time building up the town of Galt, Upper Canada, which had been started by his father's business interests in the 1830s. The town of Galt was eventually merged with Kitchener-Waterloo, Ontario, in 1973. So in the end, all the city of Lethbridge is Alexander Tillage Galt's true legacy to Canada. Bizarrely enough, even the Governor-General had accepted the name of Lethbridge for the new town, but Canada Post refused to accept it. In fact, the place always became known as Galt, Alberta, or some derivative thereof. There was even a movement to call the town Tillage. In 1885, Alexander Tillage Galt decided he wanted to invest in the Canadian Pacific Railway, which he only did after the Northwest Rebellion of 1885. His son Elliot played a major administrative part in securing more food for native peoples of the region. In 1885, Alexander Galt also personally had a branch line built from the Canadian Pacific Railway to Lethbridge, and also started a large hospital in the town, which wouldn't be finished for 17 years. He also founded the Guarantee Company of North America as an insurance company for railway workers. It was eventually became the oldest and one of the most successful insurance companies in North America that is still around today. Alexander Tillage Galt died aged 86 in 1893 in Montreal, Lower Canada. His son Elliot Galt died aged 78 in New York City, New York State, of a heart attack, aged 73. Thomas D'Arcy McGee, also known as D'Arcy McGee, was born in Cullingford, County Louth, in the Republic of Ireland, near the border with Northern Ireland. McGee stayed now until he was 17, when he left for the U.S., but after becoming disillusioned with the U.S. in general, he went back to Ireland, where he participated in the 1848 Young Ireland Rebellion, which failed partly because of the Great Irish Potato Famine. The failure of the rebellion caused McGee to become disillusioned with violence and revolution in general, so he spent the rest of his life advocating for peaceful means to change the government. McGee then went back to the U.S., where he started a series of Irish nationalist newspapers, all of which failed. He also wrote a series of history books on Irish history, as well as composing poetry and music. In 1887, McGee moved to Montreal, where he set up a successful series of newspapers. In 1858, he was elected to the Legislative Assembly and served there until 1867 with Confederation. He advocated for a new Canadian nation in Confederation that would not be divided by religion or languages as it was in his native Ireland. He also attacked the Fenians, which he saw as using violence to win Irish independence. Thomas D'Arcy McGee also got a degree in law from McGill University in 1861. In 1866, he started to advocate anti-Fenian articles in his by then hugely successful newspaper business. This series of attacks was largely successful in making sure the Fenians did not even attract passive support from the population of British North America, as they had active support from the enormous Irish population in the United States. He also advocated for Confederation to ensure harmony and unity in Canada, so as to resist any internal or external invasion or rebellion. There was also a real threat, approximately at the time of Confederation, that the Fenians would invade Canada. The Fenian crisis itself lasted from 1866 to 1871, although any practical danger the Fenians invading Canada effectively ended once Confederation was arrived. The Fenians as an organization did not become illegal in the US until 1871, by which point they had lost both political and public support in the United States and Canada, largely because of the efforts of McGee. Just after the moment of his greatest triumph, however, McGee was assassinated by a mentally unstable Irishman on April 7, 1868, thus becoming one of the two Martyrs of Confederation. Dr. Etienne-Paschal Tache was born in St. Thomas, Lower Canada in 1795, making him the only Father of Confederation to be born in the 18th century. He also served in the Canadian militia during the War of 1812 as an officer. It was during this time he began studying medicine, which he continued after the war, and graduated as a medical doctor in Philadelphia in 1819. He then practiced medicine for much of his life in Montgomery, Lower Canada. Dr. Tache was a journalist and newspaper owner as well. He got into politics in 1841 and became a fanatical British Empire loyalist, even though he was a French Canadian. He also stressed the importance of Canada remaining within the British Empire, as opposed to being annexed by the Americans. He served as Premier of Lower Canada from 1856 to 1857, and again from 1864 to 1865, when he died in office. Dr. Tache also became head of the French-Canadian Conservative Party wing called La Partie Bleue, which supported Confederation and the Roman Catholic Church, as well as the seigneurial landowning system in Lower Canada. Tache also supported Confederation as an idea to show just how loyal the French Canadians were to the British Crown and the British Empire as a whole. However, Dr. Tache only attended the Quebec Conference. He didn't like what he heard, so he stopped supporting Confederation altogether. Dr. Tache is also widely credited with creating what is today the province of Quebec provincial motto, which is Je me souviens, or I remember in English. This is the motto of the Royal 22nd Regiment, the Vendus, in the Canadian Army, which is perhaps fitting given Tache's military service, for which he was knighted by Queen Victoria. Dr. Etienne-Paschal Tache died in Montgomery, Lower Canada in 1865, aged 69, 2 years before Confederation in 1867.